So, I guess it's interesting to me. I'm looking at Auburn's picks right now. It's kind of they're really confusing to me because we see the recruiting rankings every year, and for you Auburn fans, this is going to seem like we're beating up on your team a little bit. Please refer to all our previous videos last year, including where we picked you to beat Oklahoma. You let us down. It seems to me like Auburn every year is top 10, top 5 type team, maybe a little bit slipping in the last couple of years in terms of recruiting rankings. But they've got the double whammy of not having the performance on the field and not having the performance in the draft, which to me creates this cyclical negative recruiting effect that at some point is going to take hold. Now, explain to me how Auburn, who has, I'm looking at, their 4 draft picks. The first one went 29th pick in the third round. Montravius Adams, who I actually do think will keep a pretty good NFL career. And then Carl Lawson, who everybody was pretty high on this year, had an okay season. Fourth round, ninth pick. Talk about Auburn for a minute and tell me, is there something going on down there in terms of player development, or is it scheme, or is all of this much ado about nothing and Auburn's fine? They just had a couple of bumps in the road.
Well, honestly, I don't think it's a great thing. Auburn has not had a great draft the past few years. And, I going back to something I said early in the segment, I said when you have a great draft or surprisingly good draft, it's not necessarily a good thing. And the best example I gave was when you have a team that you're surprised how well the guys do in the draft or how high they go. That's not good because that means you had a lot of really good players that never really showed it under the out on the field under your current coaching staff. That's a sign of poor coaching and poor utilization of talent. But the other thing I said is, while it may be, the better your draft, the more you've lost. At the same time, consistently good drafts do drive good programs. It brings in more talent. People see how many you're drafting. It inspires the kids on your team that they want it to be their payday. And when kids look up and they see that that school isn't sending guys in the draft or their teammates aren't being drafted, and they see how hard their teammates work to get drafted and not to make that hit that bar. It's not good. It has a negative effect. In Auburn's case specifically, Montravius Adams and Carl Lawson were both 5-star prospects. And there's only 30, 35 of those a year. Those were very, very good talents coming out of high school. And to see them go in the third and fourth round, frankly, is rather concerning. With Auburn, I think the scheme does affect things quite a bit. I think it's really bad on both sides of the ball when it comes to the NFL draft. And the reason for that offensively is the things that they emphasize offensively, both in recruiting and on the field. A lot of people focus on how they train and whatnot, but the truth is they're recruiting for this spread system. They want receivers that are sort of quick, simple route running guys, guys that are really good on the bubble screen, really good on jet sweeps, or guys that can just run straight down the field on a fly and catch you unawares on an RPO. They don't look for guys with great capability on the route tree. And that's significant because it means the ideal Auburn receiver, be it a 4-star, a 5-star, or 3-star, doesn't have the same NFL measurables as the ideal receiver for someone at, say, Texas A&M, where they have a little bit more of a sophisticated passing game. And likewise, I think the scheme does affect them a lot of times, both offensively and defensively, in terms of how they train game to game. A lot of the guards and tackles, you see Kozan and left. I mean, Kozan was considered an all-conference player, doesn't even get drafted. Why? It's because he's a great, grinding guard that was hard-nosed, but he wasn't taught complicated schemes and protections. He wasn't really ever asked to be an elite pass blocker. They really never ran in his career, true 3 and 5 step drops in a passing game. They tried to a little bit with Jeremy Johnson, and that did not go well. So, there's no tape for him. There's no training. He doesn't have nearly the experience of anybody else has that position, and it hurts them. Likewise, defensively, and the guys that did get drafted is notable. All 4 of them were actually defensive players, as opposed to Malzahn's, I guess, reputation as an offensive genius. It's interesting that all the drafted players are actually defensive guys. The defenders in practice don't get a lot of quality, impactful reps. And when I say that, I mean Malzahn's approach, and we've talked about this a number of times, is to get clean reps with a minimal amount of contact to perfect the timing and perfect the execution of the play. Muschamp changed that and fought back a little bit and got more contact in practice when he was the coordinator. Unsurprisingly, they did a lot better defensively. This past year, I think Malzahn's backed off on that a little bit from everything I've heard, and the defense was better. But at the same time, these guys just simply haven't been day out and day out trained. And I think it's also why you see Malzahn be successful at the onset of when he started the coaching job. He does well with transfer players in that he really focuses on instilling the system. And you have very limited amount of practice time. So if you take guys and you say this wherever you're at right now, we're going to spend as much time as we can to learn how to execute the plays that I want to run, you're going to be pretty good that year because they're going to run the plays well. The problem is 3 years from now, that freshman that wasn't playing, you never taught him how to block and tackle. You never taught him fundamental football. And it shows up a little bit in the draft in that their players are very good at executing their schemes and they produce well, but they're not really great football players. And they're not in a great position for another team, say an NFL team, to take those players and plug them into their different system and get them to execute. And I don't know that there's a solution for it. I think what they're doing works for them as a college team, but I don't think it really works for an NFL team looking to get their players. And at some point, it has to have a negative impact that their players aren't being good fits in the NFL and they're not getting drafted high.
Yeah, and I can't really see it much any other way. I want to give them the benefit of the doubt because I feel like Auburn has this pedigree and has a winning tradition under Gus, but the results in the draft are starting to come in line with the results on the field. And for us, we think, okay, Auburn had some injuries at quarterback last year, and they had some issues at defense before. And so it's always like something that we give an excuse if Auburn doesn't go 10, 11, 12 wins. But it's becoming a pattern, isn't it? Like we're finding reasons to explain away either lack of quarterback development, lack of defense, or whatever. But the results on the field are starting to marry with the results in the draft, and it might be one of those situations where maybe they're just not that talented. So is this a situation where Auburn is super talented and they're taking 5 stars and turn them into 3 stars, or Auburn's not evaluating very well in the recruiting process and they're taking 5 stars on paper that are actually 3 stars? I know you said Adams and Lawson were pretty high talent guys. What do you think? Is it more Auburn system? I know you just said a lot about Auburn system, or is it an evaluation issue?
I do think it's both. I think sometimes when you talk about evaluation, again, they're evaluating to a very different set of criteria. I think is the first thing you've got to keep in mind. So a lot of this has to be tempered, particularly offensive talent. They may be evaluating them correctly, but they're evaluating them for a spread offense, for a very spreadish offense. And it's a little bit like Oregon in that some of Oregon's most productive players that are small and fast or whatnot aren't really in any way a fit for the NFL. Auburn has a little bit of that problem at times, in that their evaluation just doesn't match the NFL. So what they put higher on the board is not going to be a very good NFL player. But at the same time, there's something to be said that you have a lot of Auburn guys taken low or that don't seem to pan out as much as they should. And I give you a pretty good example, and it's a guy that I thought in college was a really dangerous weapon that kind of got used as a trick role player, and it hid how good he was. That was C.J. Uzomah, the tight end. I really felt like what Uzomah did for them, that going back to the discussion we had earlier about how tight ends are dominating the NFL, they would use him as an inline blocker and motion him out all the time, and teams just had no idea what to do with Uzomah because he was a fantastic inline blocker, and he would blow out a hole, and then so they'd try to bring a big linebacker in, they'd flex wide and put Uzomah on the outside, and they couldn't cover him. You know, Last year Uzomah ended up having a pretty darn successful season with the Cincinnati Bengals and had 25 receptions, over 200 yards. I mean, not setting the world on fire, but he's a serious NFL player, and he was a fifth round draft pick, 157th. Not really all that notable. So I think that's kind of a decent example of how, maybe if Auburn ran a more traditional offense, and he was a more traditional tight end, people might have realized how good he was, and he might have been trained more as a traditional tight end. But Auburn didn't teach him a regular route tree. They didn't teach him how to really operate as an inline tight end in a pro set, and still do everything out of that. And so it set him back.